it on?
Showing the Grand County planning screens.
But that's all I'm seeing too. And it's not picking up the other participants, which is interesting.
So you started your
There we go.
Zoom meeting already.
Oh yeah. It did it for like just a hot minute.
Yeah, it's only gonna show what you're broadcasting. It's not gonna show
This.
both.
How do I get it to show that?
You have to share. Screen.
Quite possibly. Yeah. It's just gonna mirror us, but yeah. So. Sorry guys, give it just a few minutes.
So you started the Zoom meeting
Mhm.
and then you put broadcast to YouTube.
Mhm.
And then you closed out of YouTube.
I haven't closed out yet. Did I close out now?
I believe so.
I'm doing that. Okay. Well. Still just sharing that screen, huh?
Nope.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're ready to go.
Okay, I'll call this meeting of Planning Commission on July 8th, 2024 to order at 4:32. And the first thing is citizens to be heard. There's none in the audience and probably none online.
And online.
Okay. Any ex parte communications or disclosures from anyone? Okay, and here we have Steve, Mary, Aaron, Obi, and Jerry, and only Tony, who's not here. Approval of the minutes. A motion.
Approve the minutes from June 24th. As written.
I'll second.
Discussion. All in favor of approving the minutes from June 24th? And any abstentions?
Well, I didn't see them in the packet that was sent. Great. Did I just miss those?
No, they were sent out in email afterwards. So I'm still getting the packet all ready to go. I got my process now. I just didn't have it together last week. Yeah.
I know how that goes.
If you need time to review them, you should have them, but.
And Bryce, I have one question.
Sure.
Is Janine going to come to?
So it does not appear so. So
What's that?
I got no response back from her.
You got no response back from her. Okay.
So
If I remember correctly, I thought she was going to be at the next week, if you don't have availability at this.
gotcha.
Isn't that right? That's just what I remember.
It could be.
Okay.
That could work out very nicely.
Makes sense. So we won't have to amend the agenda at all. So Trish, you're up for the county commission.
So we didn't have a commission meeting in between, so I just have a couple of things from other meetings that I went to. I went to a groundwater and sewer meeting. Sorry, I'm flipping to these notes. Something that I thought would be of interest to you was that they are working with the Division of Water Rights to look at the potential of water recharge into the aquifer. And so what the concept is taking high water out of Mill Creek that is not allotted and then injecting it into an old well and then just seeing what it will do as far as recharging the aquifer. They've done a little bit of minor testing of that and have seen a bump in a surrounding well, and I can't remember how far away that well is. So kind of an interesting, in the Division of Water Rights as a part of that. Also John Files, he's a water engineer with a private firm. So kind of an interesting concept.
Trish,
Yeah.
real quick question, were they getting the extra water?
Well, oh, maybe it was Pack Creek, sorry. Yeah, it was probably Pack Creek, sorry about that.
Pack Creek,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry about that. I just put extra high water is what I put, but you're right, it's probably Pack Creek. And so, and then as far as, and I meant to mention this last time, the old Spanish Trail Arena got a very large grant, which is pretty cool. So they'll be putting in pickleball courts, very big deal. And then another playground. So it's really cool. I think it'll provide, when we're starting to look at that part of the valley, you know, it provides more infrastructure and, you know, things for that community. So pretty interesting. And it was a large grant. I want to say it was like 650,000.
You know the source,
The state.
the state.
Yeah. So pretty cool stuff. Let's see. Oh, and maybe I've already mentioned this, but I also got a grant to put in an archery range out there also. So we've doing a lot of new things out at Osta. I went to the Cane Springs Development CUP appeal. There wasn't much to that meeting. Let me kind of flip to that. It was basically more just, you know, procedural and when we're going to move on to the next. So Craig Hall, he's Grand County Land Use Hearing Officer. He worked with the 3 attorneys just to kind of set up, like, I guess, the rules of the game and then moving forward with that appeal. And then lastly, there's a new watershed council being developed. I am a part of that. I'm actually the co-chair with Mac McDonald from San Juan County. It's a mandate from the state that there are these watershed councils throughout the state. It's a mandate, but comes with no money. So that's always a great mandate. So currently, you know, the goal I think is just to bring together a variety of stakeholders and hopefully, you know, when there are larger monies available throughout the state that you could say, oh, well, this is a need in the southeastern part of the state. So right now, I think we have delineated like 23 different stakeholders on this council.
And how does it differ from MOP, which also gets grants?
I don't know. I mean, it does involve, you know, it's Grand and San Juan County, so that's great. And the meetings have been, you know, very well attended and a lot of different stakeholders from those 2 counties. So I think that that's intriguing, you know.
Certainly worth having people on, because even if there's 2 of them.
That's right. Yeah.
Obi, can you clarify MOP? What does that stand for?
That's Moab Area Watershed Partnership.
Partnership. Okay, thanks.
Lots of different meetings.
Love acronyms.
I know, that's right. I know.
And I always stumble on partnership, you know, because that's the one that I don't quite remember.
Yeah, I know. We were just talking, you know, Cara, they got that really large grant for Pack and Mill Creek, and she was trying to come up with a name for it. And I said, the acronym should be CRAP, Creek Restoration. I was trying to come up with something like, something funny so you could remember it too, right? Anyways, that's about it. That's been pretty quiet.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, I guess next up is a public hearing. And I'll call this public hearing to order and get the staff report, hear from the applicant if the applicant wants to add anything.
Just 1 second, I'll share my screen with that. what I would like to do is show you the parcel plan that we're going to be talking about today. This is out in Thompson Springs. And we have our applicant, Kevin Grimes, who is asking for a rezone. So the current zoning on this parcel is range and grazing. It's 2.2 acres, 2.22 acres. And what he would like to do is rezone it for rural residential. So the packet talked an awful lot about water for you guys. Just to make sure that everything is clear on this, he is not asking for a subdivision, which would imply that he would be asking for more water for this particular site of land. He is just asking for the rezone at this time. However, the rezone would imply that subdivision could potentially become a possibility in the future. So just to go through a summary request really quick. So this is on King Street, which is basically your westernmost street. If anybody here is actually familiar with Thompson Springs, not be happy with me stumbling over the name. So traditionally in the past, I believe that this had been used for mixed use rural residential, as well as just vacant property used for range grazing, bunnies, whatever else is in Thompson Springs. So at this point, the Thompson Springs Special Service District has a moratorium on water taps. That is the main limiting factor for pretty much all development in Thompson moving forward. Like I said, there's an awful lot of details in the packet that detail the process that he would have to go through in order to start developing this past a single residence. At this point, if he was going to pursue a subdivision, he would also need to make sure that an on-site wastewater system was appropriate on the two parcels. Let's do that. It's my first time doing this, so let me know if you need more details or if I missed something.
Any questions?
I guess the one question, so currently there's not a request for subdivision.
There's currently not.
And if this was gonna be split into multiple lots as in a subdivision, the applicant would have to come back here before this group again.
And before that even, they would have to wait until another water study was done in the Thompson Springs watershed area. So,
Infrastructure needs to be.
yes. So I talked to JR, who is the chair of their water board, and he said that the last 2 years, they've seen almost double the capacity of what they had in the previous water study. However, those were big years on the book cliffs, which tends to lead to the conclusion that the water supply is seasonal and has very, very quick recharge. They would want at least 5 years of data to support a new water study that could potentially increase the capacity of more taps. So they're on track for that, hopefully. We'll see how the next couple of years go.
This parcel of land is not a part of any of the subdivisions.
It is not a part of any subdivisions.
It didn't look like, but I wasn't sure.
And with the zoning of rural residential and with the land size that it is, he could only make 2 lots out of it anyways. So he's not doing anything big, just potentially 2 lots in the future. This will go through.
And just to make sure I understand the water issue, if you say that it's rural residential, it quote allows you to build 2 houses in terms of density, but because this lot hasn't been subdivided now, could you only build 1 house on it, or
There would only be a tap, so a water hookup for one.
only water
Yep,
for 1 house?
1 house and 1 house only.
And couldn't share it.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Until it's subdivided.
Until it's subdivided.
But then they would still need to have a study and permission from the water board in Thompson Springs before that can start.
Theoretically, could they still subdivide and, plan on hauling water in? Do they have to connect? The taps, or you have to have?
Actually sure on hold water.
And I mean, that's their prerogative, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know
silly
for
idea,
commercial
though.
use, it's allowed and we see it. Anyways,
And then
residential.
with this on the future land use map, just to like, I know that's not approved, but like I think that was identified as a zone for this.
It was in one way, but not in another. So
Right.
a little big.
Yeah.
And are you the developer? No, not the developer, just something else. So no comments from the developer and nobody in the audience who wants to speak to this public hearing.
Talk a little bit about more about water if you wanted me to, but I'm
You're
not on that board anymore. But I can kind of give you mine a little bit. When I was on the board, yeah, we put that moratorium on the development. And to be honest, I don't think we have the moratorium anymore. Thompson, they put their own moratorium. Those springs had been just slowly declining. It's a sole source water source, right? It's the spring, and it had in the years in that engineered study from Sunrise Engineering, it had gone from like 210 gallons a minute to like 65. So yeah, I would agree. Those last couple of years were really big years, but so they're definitely in an interesting situation, right? And they are pursuing a lot of other water sources, but that's kind of where it sits.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, everything is stagnated until they can figure out other water rights or another water source, or the study. The subsequent study could tell them that they could afford to have more elementary residences there.
And you know, the problem with hauling water, at least if they're hauling it out of TSSD, which they do have a load out, you know, at any point, you know, they could discontinue allowing water to be hauled. So it's kind of sketchy to
Yeah.
rely on.
Feasible,
Slow
but just a bad idea.
Right. right. Right.
People can make their own bad choices.
That's it.
So I have a question just about zoning in general. And excuse my ignorance on range and grazing, but it doesn't come up much. But what advantage for the applicant is this zone change?
I think the advantage is the idea of subdividing in the future. So
At some
currently, yeah, with the parcel size with range and grazing, he couldn't put any more than one residence on it. And he couldn't subdivide it and keep the zoning. So
And with one tap, that's all they can do anyway today. So
I have just a procedural question, and sorry we couldn't link up to
Yeah, I know.
go over this question.
Yeah.
In the motion, so it has the recommended motion, so if someone were to move to approve it, there's that condition, if approved, the following condition. I'm wondering if we might want to omit that. Because if we do state that, then it sort of sets the precedence that we have to be almost over communicative in, you know, what we're approving versus what we're not. And so that way, if that kind of clause were to be omitted in the future, then could somebody come back and say, well, you set this precedent before where you said this explicitly, you know, did not give us permission to, you know, approve subdivision, yada, yada, yada. And that gets us into some issues in the future. I don't know.
Oh, and you can't subdivide anyway.
Yeah.
Until-
Right.
Currently,
That's not
it's
even in
all a
question.
process.
Yeah.
So
So
we may just omit it.
I would think that's a great idea.
Sounds good.
I thought that's-
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to close this public meeting and ask for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, but I'm going to change it because we're not passing an ordinance. So I'm going to move to recommend a positive recommendation to the county council to rezone property located at 68 King Street North in Thompson Springs on Grand County parcel number 070021015 to the rural residential RR zone district based on we're leaving that second out. That section.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? I'll just mention, I was impressed with the going down all the criteria and the fact that there might have been a missed zone to start with because it's 2.2 acres and range and grazing should be 5 acres at least. The kind of two ways in which this thing has looked like in the future land use plan, it seems to me to be fairly close to where development's going to occur. So if this were broken into a couple of 1 acre lots, it would seem to exceed the kind of density you'd like to see there, and it may actually help if that area can develop to develop. So one of the reasons I'm for it.
Also, I wish I could take credit for any of that. That was all Jenna. So she did most of this report right before she left.
Any other discussion? I'm going to call for a vote. How many vote to approve this motion? Motion passes. I guess we're on to the landscape ordinance. That is Bryce, probably helped out by Katie.
I'll say Katie helped out by Bryce.
Good.
So we just wanted to give a little bit of an update on landscape ordinance, chugging along. Some of the things that we've been playing with, things that we're still unsure of and would like a little guidance from Planning Commission, and an update on the conversation we had with County Commission. So on May 21st, we did a presentation and brought the working draft, quite similar to the version that you all have in front of you, to County Commission. There have been a couple small changes since then. But in general, comments from Commission were generally favorable. There was an emphasis on keeping language simple, easy to understand, making sure it's easy to enforce, just, sort of the same things we've been talking about. Commissioner Hedin emphasized the importance of the landscaping code and the accompanying manual as an educational tool. Both Commissioners Winfield and Walker suggested more input from construction contractors. We have had a lot of input from landscapers and input from Planning Commissioner Evers as a developer, but a little bit more specifically from folks who are actually building things. That's something that we're hoping to get into in the next couple weeks. Commissioner Walker probably expressed the most concerns about creating a burden for smaller homeowners, suggested thinking more seriously about tiering requirements for small and large developments in terms of what actually has to be submitted, or actually what the having different rules potentially, and was also concerned in general about demand hardening. Which, is not something that I fully understand. But in general, the idea that if we're using less water now, and we're changing things like having less lawn, then later, if there are across the board restrictions that have to happen, it'll be actually a lot more difficult for people who have already downsized. So something to keep in mind. And then lastly, Commissioner Clapper emphasized more positive incentives for refraining from disturbance. Currently, the incentive that we have is if you disturb land, then you have to comply with the disturbed land requirements, which is, I guess, could potentially be seen as like not actually a positive and more of sort of a neutral incentive. And then also suggested that the current exemptions for large turf areas, so we have, ballparks, cemeteries, public recreation areas, golf courses, that maybe we're giving a little bit too much of a free pass, which might be unfair if individual people are feeling like they have to tighten their belt with their lawn. If these sort of like large turf installations are able to keep operating with very little change, then, people might feel that that's unfair. Especially for those that are private. So that's something to think about. So we have a copy of the working draft here, and I'm going to highlight a couple things that have changed. Some of these things had changed, I think, right before the last time you all saw this. But we removed the requirement for any existing development to come into compliance. That's probably the largest thing that has changed. And the compliance was something that we were going back and forth a lot about. We weren't sure what the trigger point should be for if you have an existing property, you know, you're living there, or doing business there, and then you do some sort of change, you know, at what point do you have to come into compliance? So we just decided that for now, in the interest of passing this ordinance and getting some sort of progress out there, it might make sense to just apply it to new construction. And then ideally, you know, a year or 2 years down the line, if this is successful, people start to understand it. People start to understand how to work with the requirements. Maybe then it might make sense to come back and look at an update that could include coming into compliance. So at the moment, we're thinking a tiered requirement with a type 1 landscape plan and a type 2 landscape plan. The first one triggered by building permit for any new construction, not like a renovation. And type 2 would be triggered by site plan review. So that would be these sort of larger developments, multifamily residential, larger commercial. Second thing, which I believe we were discussing at the last time we all spoke, was the applicability area. So Elisa and I talked more about, you know, having what the impact of this ordinance is going to be, and, you know, where it might not be worth having strict requirements because there's not going to be much development anyway. So the thought was to apply this to Spanish Valley and the North 191 corridor. And then question for discussion would be whether that should include Thompson Springs and Crescent Junction or not. And then there is an exemption that we've been tossing around that I played a lot more with if we do add it, what the language should be. And still not sure whether it should be added. But so this is not in the current draft, but the potential language that might be added is here, number 3. Areas for grazing of personal non-commercial livestock in approved zones up to 1 acre per animal unit are exempt from the plant list. Pasture for animals shall not be irrigated with culinary water. So this was in response to some folks that we've talked to, requesting that or pointing out the fact that areas for keeping personal livestock, it might just not really even be possible to do so with the current plants that are on the plant list. Like it's very difficult to grow pasture with those plants. And so I did a little bit of research into, okay, if we're going to do that, it makes sense to limit it to a specific amount of space per animal. And unfortunately, I don't have a local source, but the University of New Hampshire has guidelines for goats and sheep require 0.2 to 0.3 acres of pasture per animal, while cows and horses require 1 to 2 acres per animal. And then in section 10.2 of the land use code, there are definitions of what an animal unit is. So sheep and goats count as between 0.1 to 0.4 animal units, whereas horses and cows are more like 1 animal unit. So it's basically trying to create an equivalency for the amount of pasture that's necessary. And so all that shakes out to about 1 acre per animal unit. That said, it's quite a large exception, especially for cows and horses when we're comparing it to how strict the requirements we're setting for lawn area are. This can be somewhat mitigated by requiring pasture to be irrigated with non-culinary water, but even so, we're looking at a much larger allowance for pasture to even be possible to sort of raise domestic animals or like domestic livestock, as opposed to how much lawn you would be able to have. So, you know, we're looking at several thousand square feet of additional pasture per animal, as opposed to 1,000 square feet sort of additional possible lawn that we're allowing. So the fairness of that is debatable and I think should be discussed. And yeah, in terms of where it's allowed, grazing is currently only allowed in rural residential and range and grazing, and up to 4 animal units per acre. Any questions so far? Small questions?
Just one.
Sure.
In the applicability area, I think the conversation about Spanish Valley and North 191 corridor makes a lot of sense. I just wondered what the thoughts are on Thompson and Crescent.
So this is an area that I don't know as much about. I'm only going to be able to repeat what Elisa's thoughts were before she left, but she thought that Thompson and Crescent were both places that there could potentially be more development in the future based on availability of water and a little bit still uncertain at the moment, but because of that potential, basically.
Katie, I got a question. So I remember the first kind of the primary objective of this is so people can get side buyback credits, right? We're like still on consensus. How does, like, it seems like this is like, you know, we could go down a rabbit hole of pasture for animals and stuff. How much of this falls in that scope of, like, do we need to address that or not to just get this landscaping credit kind of thing? I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but then you got, you know, I can think of properties I'm like, wow, they got less than an acre, they've got a horse on that, and I'm just like, you know, do we even tackle this issue right now? I mean, a lot of people don't have pasture here, they just feed them hay.
Right.
They're more like pets. I mean,
and in that situation, this wouldn't apply to those folks. This would only apply to folks who are growing pasture. And none of the things mentioned here are like what you mentioned about folks having a horse on a, you know, smaller than an acre. That's not changing because of this ordinance. I'm just referencing existing code there. Yeah.
So, like, do we, like, I'm just wondering, do we need to even address that then, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how much of this?
If we were to not add this exemption, what it would look like is, so according to the way the ordinance is currently written, nobody would have a problem with their existing property. You know, if you have pasture and you have livestock, you're not going to have to change anything because you're legal non-conforming. If this would be for new construction of someone who wanted to add in pasture, thereby disturbing a certain area to a lot that they've, you know, recently purchased or changing use or something like that. And yeah, and so then they would be unable to probably plant the type of pasture that they would need for their livestock because of the plant list. So this exception is just an exception to the plant list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are a couple other ways that this could be structured. I mean, potentially something could be added to the plant list, like something that is better for pasture could be added to the plant list. But I mean, basically what we're looking at is like how much disturbance of an area by replacing the native plants or putting non-native plants into an already disturbed area are we going to allow?
Yeah.
For what reasons?
I guess I'm looking at it too. Like, if you're just going to be like, you can't use culinary water to plant. It's funny. I'm dealing with somebody right now that they're like, I want to have a cow here, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, we're doing irrigation for them, and it's a new lot, and I'm just kind of like, thinking about how this is working. So I'm like, if we're trying to like protect our aquifer in terms of like our culinary water, if you're kind of like have a well and you can water it, I'm just kind of like, do we even bother with it? You know, like I'm hung up on this plant list, right? Like it's just, to me, I'm like, do we just focus on water? Or do we focus on plants? Because now we got this plant directory that we have to maintain, and I'm like, well, I don't know. There's just things I've been thinking about this. So.
The plant list is something that I'd also like to discuss. I mean, I've Bryce can speak more to it, but I think that the plant list has been something that's been really tricky and submittal for the city. And I've heard from developers that one of the problems is that they don't necessarily know what species of plant are going to be available when they're putting together their landscape plans. You know, so they can say, and we've gone back and forth, like, okay, maybe you don't have to tell us the species of plant, but maybe we want to know what, if it's a high, medium, or low water use plant and how big it's going to get, because we sort of need to know those things to be able to determine coverage and hydrozoning. So I guess the question is, in some ways, the plant list makes things easier for submittal, just because we at least have something to guide folks with. The question is there a way to use it as a guide while still creating a little bit of flexibility in case those species aren't available when you go to the plant store?
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry, my computer's trying to reboot. Hang on, I don't want to do that.
No worries. We can also circle back to this.
So, no, so that was one thing that watching people submit these with the city, and I'm not talking about landscape architect or even a developer per se, just watching residents try to figure out, well, if I put this tree here, but I want these shrubs here, like I just want to go to the nursery, pick up the plants that I liked that day and put them in. And so maybe having something with a little more guidance and less restriction. Yeah. If you would like to put in some water-wise plants, we have this material over here. However, what we would recommend is small plants for this area to help with water-wise outdoor conservation, trees with canopy of a certain size, basically making it more of a recommendation, and then focusing on the sod buyback program. So that people can actually get that incentive.
Has Cara given you any guidance on all of this?
She was really great at the city as well.
Yeah, I mean, the plant list was, Cara helped develop the city's plant list, and if we do use a plant list, we'll be probably using the cities or something very close to the cities. We want to make sure that the species we're recommending are available, but even so, you know, what's available at Wild Landscapes will change from week to week and, you know, season to season. So yeah, it's something to think about.
Hey, Katie, so I wasn't quite finished with the Thompson and Crescent conversation yet.
Oh, sorry, Jay.
But that's okay. That was a good conversation. I guess in my mind, I view them as kind of a special case because of the water requirements. I guess I don't see, as of right now, any great amount of building going on there. So probably no permits. And in fact, when that does start up again, probably a review and maybe a different set of landscaping rules for them anyway. So my thought was, unless there's just in the interest of getting this out there and getting it done, unless there's a compelling reason to include them now, my advice would be to take them out for now and get this out and deal with the 80 or 90% or maybe the 99% of what we want to cover now. I just wondered if you or anybody else on the commission had any thoughts about that approach.
It's almost like Thompson's like an extreme test case. Like there's no water, like they're not doing anything. So do people want development? If they do, they're going to have to be super thrifty with their water. But I mean, do we have to outreach to them? I mean, those people are engaged. They'll show up to a meeting.
Yeah.
So from what I see, and it's like, you know, maybe that's the question.
Well,
Should be. It's like, hey, what do you guys think?
I guess my question is there even a reason to include them in this plan at this point? Because you really can't build new houses, so it's not going to get triggered anyway.
Right.
And they don't have any water for landscaping anyhow.
Right.
Well, if that's the rule in Thompson, if they're not able to do any landscaping right now, they wouldn't be needing to follow the regulation anyway. You don't have to plant anything. You can leave your land as vacant as you want, correct?
If
Well,
in
there's
the disturbed area, you need to have 20% plant cover. So that might be tricky for them.
Could it be like for rocks or?
Well, you need 75% coverage and 20% live plants.
So yeah.
It would.
Thompson dictates their water, right? The water there too, doesn't Thompson Water tell you if you can? They do the dictation, they dictate that water availability, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. I think this was just a big question mark for us. I didn't have very much information about it. I think Elisa was really unsure. It wasn't a particularly strong recommendation. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, if it makes sense to return to this and think more about the special situation at the time when it is possible to develop more in Thompson and Crescent Junction, I think that makes sense.
What Jerry says and others makes sense to me to keep them off for now. I mean, if they really got a lot of water and we think, oh, we'll just add them to the list in an amendment. If they need something special when they get water, then we have to address something special. So I think leaving them off makes sense.
I guess I'm still hung up over like the well thing. Okay, so like I view it as like we have this culinary water that's a source that like, okay, development's going to be based off of this. But when you drill, like this is a question I have for Trish, right? Like, because I think you know more about this. When you have a well, it's like you can have 40 cows. So many, like when you have a water right on a well, like that's like a big deal about like that's water you can use to do certain stuff with. And the like I'm just thinking like the Roberts Road area, like the water's like 30 feet down there. And so I'm just there's a part of me that's like, okay, if we only care about like the culinary water, which is coming from the Glen Canyon Aquifer, like why do we care about what they're doing with their well? Right? Like, okay, you have a well, like in theory, you could have 40 acres of alfalfa with that well. So, like,
No, I think all wells are either defined as culinary or ag. And then it is only supposed to be a certain amount. Now, whether people stick to that.
Right. Well, I just wonder how this.
Here.
I just wonder how this integrates into that, right? Like, I'm just kind of like, well, do we want to monitor? Like, do we want to get into the like you already have a well and that has its own these things going on with it, right? And so, do we want to like add another layer on, or do we just let them be like, well, let the state, whatever your agency determines how you use your well, let them just do that. And we're talking more of like the public water source. I don't know.
I mean, maybe you should give context. I don't know if the well, where that issue came from, because this is one of Dale's concerns, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about a large bunch of issues right now, and I'll try to parse through them a little bit. Obi, did you want to add anything before I respond?
I was only going to say, the state will require monitoring probably in the next couple or 3 years, as they can do it, because it is interesting. I mean, it happened in California. People put their straws in and could draw as much water as they wanted because nobody monitored it. Now they do monitor it. So it's coming.
The agency that tells
I'm not sure that we do at all.
Right. That tells people how to use the well.
Aaron, I do know the answer to one of your questions. When I got a well permit 4 years ago, when you apply for a well permit, you tell them whether you want to use it for ag, for watering grass or whatever, or for domestic use. And you can request any or all of the above, and they look at the surrounding area and the aquifer, and they determine whether or not they will give you everything you requested, or a subset of that. So if you look on the State Division of Water Rights website, you can actually, for any well, you can actually look it up and see what they have the rights for. And not all wells have the same rights.
I just don't want. I want this to piece in with that, and I'm kind of like, well, we were trying to get to this thing where it's like get people sod credits. I don't know. I'm coming from the.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm coming from the point where I'm like, we could add so much to this, but I'm like, all right, aren't we just trying to get a sod credit?
It's a plant list, right?
Yeah.
No, right. It's a plant requirement that we're talking about. Whether or not we apply a plant requirement for ag usage, for pasture and grazing, basically. So So I think it's not a water issue.
Yeah, I think the simplest response is that this ordinance isn't telling anyone how much water they can use. That's nowhere in the ordinance. The restriction that we're talking about right now is has to do with the type of plant that's allowed to be planted in a certain area. And that currently in the plant list, there are not plants, at least according to the folks I've spoken to who do have, personal livestock, there are not plants that are really appropriate for pasturing personal livestock listed on the plant list. And so in order to not get in the way of people keeping their personal livestock, this exemption would be so that they could plant pasture grass. And then the question there is, if we give them the exemption, we want to be fair with in relation to the restrictions that we're creating for lawn. And those are mandated by the sod buyback program.
Right.
The restrictions that we have are for lawn are somewhat beyond the basic restrictions required by the sod buyback program. But even if you look at the restrictions required by the state, what we would be offering in this exemption is still a larger exemption that would be allowed for lawn by the state.
Well, that's still past that. Their buyback program.
Yeah, so far I've spoke with someone from the Division of Water Rights a while ago, and yeah, so far so good.
Sorry, it just seems like an onion.
Yeah, it's complicated.
I mean, I seriously, when I started talking, I'm like, oh, well, I didn't get the joke at the beginning of the part. I was like, oh yeah, sorry. I asked that.
PD talking about when we were on that field trip, like that there are pasture mixes that are recommended for the area.
Right.
Is that one of the pieces too? Do we just
add it to the plant list?
Right, to the
Yeah.
plant list.
Potentially.
There literally are pasture mixes that have been kind of like developed specifically for what's called the Moab,
Right.
So we're trying to actually have a more expansive exemption so we can still meet the sod. We can still meet the sod or the lawn requirements, but still have your agriculture land. It's like, okay, that's
And to be fair,
took it for a
right? Because how do we give folks an exemption? And this is also commercial agricultural land is completely exempted from the entire ordinance.
Yeah.
So we're not even talking about that.
Right.
We're talking about personal agriculture, like if you have sheep or goats or cows or horses or something just for your personal use, and you have pasture for those.
Right.
And so how do we make sure, if we're giving those folks an exemption so they can continue to do that it's fair, and we're not giving them a much larger exemption than you would be able to get for a lawn, basically.
Yeah.
a dozen people.
Right.
Maybe, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very
It's
specific.
just an interesting-
Part of me is just thinking like if someone looks at it and cries foul, like it's not fair, tough cookies. I mean, what's the minimum that needs to happen in terms of an exemption for that to still be an allowable thing, and just
Right.
go with that. And if it's not, if it seems like, well, that's far greater than the sod I'm able to have, well, it's we're not looking at it in quantities compared to each other. It's just, can this lifestyle continue? What's the minimum that we need to do to allow that to happen?
Yeah, good point, Steve. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and then again, this is all for new construction. So it's like anyone is going to be able to continue with their current lifestyle. It's about whether, new folks are going to be able to have this lifestyle and new construction that's going to happen in the future.
A question on that with the legal non-conforming, if let's say a family, the patriot, the mom and dad, they pass away, they want to hand the land down with the change of title, does that trigger anything? Like, would they still be able to do the thing they're doing with the
Not in the way
The
it's currently written,
non-conforming?
no.
so it would be permissible then?
Yeah, whatever they wouldn't have to change anything, no.
I guess the only situation I worry about with that is if someone's been here, they wanted to subdivide, for family, continue, their lifestyle, then that would be triggered and no longer, then they'd have to come into compliance and may not possibly work. Again, we're probably talking a handful of things, a handful of instances over probably decades.
Actually,
But yeah, so I think that's something, I mean, you know, I
Worth considering.
protect that.
And I think, Steve, actually, I would agree. I don't think people would think it's unfair any more than somebody who has a residential lot should think it's unfair that somebody has an agricultural operation is going to use a lot more water. It makes sense if you've got animals, you have to pasture them. Yet I only have a lawn that I should be more restricted in water use. So I think it probably is okay. Seems reasonable.
Great. Any other comments on that one?
No, thanks for explaining it. I didn't.
It's complicated. Well, it's because all these issues are related to each other and they affect each other.
Yeah.
It's just the question of where we're placing the restriction.
One comment I have, just, you know, I know that you're finding it a challenge to come up with information in this local area about the size of pasture that's needed, you know, for, you know, what percentage of an animal equals. Just to point it out, it's probably on your radar, but, you know, University of New Hampshire, I'm sure New England, you know,
Yeah,
pasture is
much easier to grow pasture.
Yeah, so our space may actually be considerably larger, which
Right.
is kind of exacerbating
I
that
know.
possible issue of fairness. Just to point that out.
Very good point. All right, moving on. So the next section is turf grass limits. So we've updated our framing a little bit. I think it's improved. So we're hoping to create a little bit of flexibility here. Turf grass is allowed in residential developments and shall be limited to 300 square feet of turf per bedroom or 25% of the total lot size, whichever is smaller. So I like the framing of the square feet per bedroom or percentage of lot size. I think that works pretty well in terms of flexibility. Those numbers can change, the percentage and the square footage per bedroom. And to try to create kind of a balance between, if we're thinking about turf as an amenity, something that uses a lot of water, you know, is not necessarily a native species, and yet is something that potentially we believe people have a right to a certain amount of, that basing that on bedroom makes a lot of sense. And then the 25% of the total lot size, you know, if you have quite a small lot, then you at least, you know, still get a certain percentage. And then this additional turf up to 1,000 total square feet may be planted if both of the following conditions are met. Approved drought tolerant grass is used, and irrigation for all additional turf is from on-site storage of rainwater or recycled gray water.
Just an amendment to that. Okay, you're not allowed to use gray water for turf. Water codes as well. So yeah, I could just make sure that's taken out.
Well,
rainwater, maybe,
rainwater,
but yeah, gray
yeah.
water is a hard no.
Right. Yeah, we could have included secondary water in that list. I was hesitant to do so because that does seem like quite a large exemption. And you know, I think this is also related to something that Erin brought up earlier when I was trying to parse out your comment. I mean, one of the intentions, if you look at the purpose, is to maintain the aquifer. So culinary water is a concern. It is the primary concern. The level of the aquifer is also a concern. So, and you know, that relates to a lot of general, you know, ecosystemic functions, the ability of the aquifer to recharge. So, and you know, secondary water isn't something that we have an unlimited supply of. So we need to balance those things. So yeah, I mean, it's worth discussing. This will be quite the strict requirement if the only way to add additional turf is rainwater. Currently, there's not a lot of folks who have a rainwater collection system, and it's also, you have to get a permit to, you know, store beyond a certain amount of rainwater. But you know, that's currently how this is written, and it is an addition. Like already, you're allowed to have a certain amount of turf. This is just additional turf. So something to think about. the next section that we're sort of reconsidering is the tree requirement. So currently we have a section that requires all development in multifamily, general business, and neighborhood commercial to have a tree for every 40 linear feet of street frontage, and that tree has to be within the front yard setback space. This language is taken from the city's ordinance, and the idea is that in areas where there's likely to be pedestrian traffic or areas that are more urban, it's useful to have trees to provide shade for pedestrians and also to mitigate the heat island effect. And that's not required for all zones because there's lots of places where that's not necessarily an issue. There aren't necessarily people walking. But Bryce can talk a little bit more about this, but we have learned a little bit from the city's experience that what ends up happening is just, you know, there are issues such as access, non-conforming buildings, utility easements, and basically what the city's getting is a majority of applicants are asking for a variance on this one. So maybe not the easiest thing to enforce. So we're talking about trying to imagine whether this requirement could become an incentive, since we do want to encourage those trees in the front yard setback space.
Katie, that's one thing that may not be as big an issue in the county as the city too, for just because of the reasons that you're not as crowded, right? So there's more room to do these.
Does any of that, we like have to meet that minimum requirements for the,
That is not required, no.
Just that we don't really have any one lot size or lot configuration within our county. You can take pretty much any one lot from our parcel map, look at it and go, whoop, well, I can't really put in the amount of trees I need to here because there's 3 driveways, 2 utility easements, and potentially some random light pole, or this is where the neighbor parks their camper. It doesn't work overall for this, but the idea of incentivizing trees toward the front of the property to try to reduce the heat island effect, or even on driveways and near that, could be something moving forward. I'm not sure what that incentive would look like.
That was just my question, because I know that we've been talking about incentives for a while, but as Grand County, like, what can we feasibly do? I mean,
I think incentive of a tree is the tree itself.
Way to be here,
I agree with you, but but I do wonder, like, I don't know, not to get too down the rabbit hole, but I mean, what do we even have, like, tax incentive? But then you need personnel to manage that. I mean, like, do we even actually have any ability to offer incentives?
Ideally, the incentive would be contained within this ordinance, in that the only thing I can imagine is reducing the requirements for disturbed areas. If you put a tree in, you know, maybe you don't have to have as much coverage. It would be nice to have that make some logical sense. Like if the tree is actually mitigating a problem that would otherwise be mitigated by other requirements, then maybe you can reduce those requirements if you put in the tree. I mean, currently trees are somewhat incentivized by the way the disturbed land requirements work anyway, because they do cover a lot of space and they do count as live plant coverage. So if you put in 1 or 2 trees on a small lot, you're going to have your coverage. So, I mean, that's already an incentive, but it's not incentivized to put the tree specifically closer to the street.
Maybe that would just be something better as in our booklet that says best practice.
Right, plant trees, best practice.
Yeah.
And then for the updated framing on section 1 there, what is the minimums for the state that is putting? I mean, are they saying like 1,000 square feet minute? Like
We're talking about the turf
yeah.
requirements
Can you
again.
kind of skip that? I had a question on that.
It's percentage of lot size.
Okay.
And so it is 50%, lawn has to be less than 50% of front and side yard. Maybe further.
So we're restricting it further than that then?
Yeah, 25%
Okay.
of total lot
Doubling
size.
the state.
Yeah, we're adding to what the state
Yeah,
requires.
yeah.
I have another question on that one as well. For the 300 square feet per bedroom,
Mhm.
Is that taking into account ADUs as well and adding up their?
I think it
bedroom count?
would. Yeah. worth making a note of that.
Yeah, maybe
to
that should
clarify.
be explicit in there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to sort of have some kind of approximation of an understanding of how many people are living on a lot and have the turf amenity be reflective of the number of people who are using it. Moving on. So the fire prone areas section that was previously in the draft has been taken out. And that was partially because it just seemed like another can of worms. But I think that should be run by you all. So there are advantages to having fire restrictions. This really helps. And if this gets taken out of the ordinance, it can still be in the manual. But requiring people to create this defensible space around their property so that in the case of a fire, the fire would be less likely to spread. And these were taken directly from meetings that I had with the fire department. But yeah, most basically keeping any kind of fire prone plant material away from 5 feet of the building, and then having these sort of larger and larger radiuses with requirements are stricter closer to the house, and then farther away they get less strict. But it gets into a lot of specifics, but yeah, this all came from sort of fire department best management practices. And yeah, curious what you all think about how much this should be prioritized in the ordinance.
Talk with the fire department. What are their thoughts on it?
I think it's important.
What are the fire prone areas?
So the LaSalle Mountains are the most fire prone area, but then there's lots of different factors that make different areas fire prone in different ways. Like along the sort of North 191 corridor, there's a lot of cheatgrass. And one thing that I took away from those meetings is actually the role that weeds play in fires. That, one of the biggest issues for the fire department is weeds like cheatgrass that create these kind of ladder fuels, I guess, between, whereas normally the natural desert landscape is sort of these separated out, bunch grasses and bushes. When you have something like cheatgrass that is continuous, creates a ladder. So that said, we do have in the ordinance, I didn't mention it in here because we haven't changed anything, but in the working draft, you'll find a section on weeds, which requires removal of noxious weeds and some additional weeds, including cheatgrass. And so that will have a large effect on like fire safety by itself. These would be sort of additional requirements beyond that.
So are you going to define fire prone areas, or will they be defined somewhere in the code?
Is that still written in here? I thought I had taken that out.
Because the mountain already has it. The building code requires it if it's a fire prone areas.
Mary, do you see, where does it say fire prone areas? Oh, it's just that the section is called fire prone areas. I see. I need to change that. This would just be defensible space requirements.
Are you going to define fire prone areas anywhere?
We're not, because we were previously distinguishing fire prone areas from non, and then after speaking with the fire department, their suggestion was to apply it across the board. Yeah. Yeah.
So it'd be even anybody.
Every place is fireproof.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I totally agree with that. So showing you how that works.
Yeah, I mean,
I like these rules. My guess is it'd be difficult to enforce them. And sometimes rules are good to have in case somebody just violates them terribly. Not quite sure what to do. This is just good fire-wise procedures.
right. As I was saying before, even if they don't end up in the ordinance, they can they can be in the manual. Yeah, there's nothing currently in Grand County Code that requires anybody to follow these. So, and that was one of the conversations I had with Clark at the fire department was this would be introducing something that they would like to see, but hasn't existed anywhere yet. And it would be putting the burden of enforcement on our department as opposed to the fire department.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, I'm thinking about how this would apply. Let's say I owned a piece of property on Pack Creek and it's a lot of scrub.
Mhm.
It's fire prone, but now I have to like mow down there, or like I'm just trying to be like if I was a landowner, it's like, yeah, okay, this is a problem, but it's also like this is a natural area. Now we're taking these natural areas and landscaping them. I'm just like, that's some of the questions I have. And the city owns a ton of property on Pack Creek, right out by the golf course. They're like the main property owner. So is the city going to be like, oh, now I want a lawnmower out on the creek underneath your commons? I don't know.
And if you're the one who buys the new property there, you're the only one who has to be compliant. So if your neighbors,
Right.
We also
you're just
see
sitting there,
giant fires on Pack Creek.
Yeah.
I'm like, ooh, I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't.
And again, the majority of the problems in these situations are caused by invasive weeds, which are already required to be removed. So if somebody, and we can also look at that too, but if somebody who, buys a new property on Pack Creek, they're going to have to go in and remove invasive species that are, sort of like the worst culprits with fire anyway. And, they're going to be leaving the native species. So that would already be required. And so then this would be kind of requiring exactly what you just said, this sort of like more landscaping. Whereas just the weed requirements might take care of the worst of it anyway.
Yeah, I just wonder if the fire department, when they're talking, like that's just such a massive work project. But I'm like, this is such a problem here. I don't know, like when, several years ago, like, we almost lost neighborhoods because of Pack Creek catching on fire. And do you use this as a stick to make people clean up those areas? But it's like, part of me is like, nature left alone is like, also these are like corridors to watch. I don't know. I'm really torn on that one. How I think about it.
I think that's part of that huge grant they just got Cara and with in conjunction with state fire plans and all that, they're trying to clean out building property.
And the work of the property on each
When I say
yeah.
clean out, but you know what I mean, clean out where they're not
Yeah.
really avenues for fire.
Residents are allowed to do that anyway. That has to be done by the resident has property adjacent to the creek.
Right,
Oh,
that's
a
true.
huge piece of the info right there, right? Like, so,
We do have this 6.4.6b perennial streams, and this is just taken directly from state code. But a stream alteration permit from the state engineer is going to be required for altering the landscape within 2 times the width of the active channel of a perennial stream. And so that would be required anyway if somebody wanted to change anything close to a perennial stream. They would have to go through that process.
there's a part of me that's like, okay, the fire department, we listen to our experts, and it's like, you're throwing this out here. I don't know. Like, I'm like, oh, the fire department says yes. I'm just trying to frame the argument because you're kind of asking us what we think. And I'm like,
Right.
what do you guys think?
Some of these things are really not that big a deal, like the 5 feet from building should be free of noxious weeds. In a new house, it's gonna be that way anyway. It's all excavated.
In an undisturbed area, but yeah. I guess it depends on how large the property is and what the different sections are.
But yeah, if this is applicable when you get a new building permit, then by definition, you've got a new building and you've got excavation around the building, so.
Well, and I
That
just
one's easy
wonder
to hit.
if you're like putting onus on property owners to like do this like fire like reduce fire risk. And so like, let's say I didn't, and then I caused a fire and it burnt down your house. Are people going to be like, they weren't following the code? And then I'm just trying to see all that. I don't know. I see this as like kind of a big deal.
I guess,
Like we're talking about sod buyback, and I don't know.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know that Pack Creek area well enough. I'm going to guess, and you can help me here, most of the houses would have 30 feet between them and going down into Pack Creek. Is that probably right?
Some
Or not?
years. It's gonna be quite a bit.
Maybe. What's that?
Erosion. So, and there's a lot of private property owners along Pack Creek, even going into the city. So that's one that if we were talking about fire danger, it would be the houses are adjacent enough. And
But are they,
space would be
the
great.
question really was, are they 30 feet away from the Pack, going down Pack Creek? They're just
Not
right
all.
up against it.
Some,
Okay,
so
that's helpful.
maybe one or two, but still, yeah,
well,
not all of them are a good distance.
They're,
away.
they're probably 5 feet, so we can get the first part of it.
yeah, some of these are easy. Other ones I can see problems like the distance between treetops. Does that apply only to new planted trees? Or does that apply to trees that are 40 years old? Because Pack Creek's a good example. There's a lot of dense trees in there. I'll guarantee they're not 18 feet apart.
Right.
That's between treetops. I would guess that means there's a gap of 18 feet from one tree to the next. If you look at the space between them, I can guarantee that's not the case.
One thing that could solve some of these problems is making this section like a sort of subsection of the disturbed area requirements. So in that case, this would only be applied to area that's getting disturbed, like you were just talking about. And if you're replanting a landscape, ensuring that the new landscape that you're putting in is compliant with.
There you go. Good idea.
Yeah. I think the second and the third bullet in the fire prone are probably the two difficult ones. The rest of them, probably most of the people are going to be compliant anyway.
There's definitely some houses around that are not compliant with bullet point number 1,
Yeah.
including the one that just burned down on my street.
But again, think about new permit, right?
All the Castle Valley.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was thinking of Castle Valley, and, you know, I won't mention who, but there was one person who had a cedar shake roof, and trees that grow right up along it. I mean, you know, my son in Oregon, well, it's a lot wetter there, but they have these wonderful maple trees that are nice and high, come up to the second story. They have to worry a little bit about the wind knocking them into it, but they would not be fire safe at all. But Castle Valley isn't fire safe, and many people are out of fire-wise compliance. So yeah, it's all interesting. There, almost everybody wouldn't have this problem of a natural area. There are probably some that are along Castle Creek that might. So, but that's an interesting problem.
Absolutely. Oh, sure. The area within 5 feet of any building shall be free of noxious weeds and other fire-prone plant material. So I actually I changed this recently to make it a little bit less strict. It was originally free of any type of plant material whatsoever. And it just seems like a lot of folks plant little annual flowers in front of their house. That's not going to be a problem.
I think your suggestion about disturbed areas is a really good suggestion.
And leave that in the part, the best practice manual.
Yeah, I do think that this ordinance functions better when as many things as possible are sort of underneath the disturbed area requirements.
Yeah, I think the fire prone areas one as written currently, if that was just in there, I think would cause issues for years, things that we couldn't even foresee, on a case by case law basis.
Yeah, it's pretty much the strictest part of this ordinance in terms of specifics.
Random question, maybe one of you would know, like, I don't know, does insurance define, does this make sense at a certain level? Like, I know I've had some friends that are trying to build up a Willow Basin and they're just like, we're not gonna insure you, or, you know what I'm saying? Does it fall?
The other regulatory agency,
Yeah.
insurance company.
Yeah, right,
Well, if it doesn't meet the ordinance, your insurance won't cover it.
Right.
yeah.
I know that
It's becoming a bigger deal with
I think it has been an issue with certain places that have implemented guidelines like this. And like if you look on, certain, I think like Forest Service guidelines and stuff, there's big disclaimers, where we have nothing to say about insurance. So.
yeah, it's just the design, sorry.
So I guess moving on. Don't want to take forever on this. Submittal. So this is a big area that we haven't really worked out yet, and is really our next big thing that we need to figure out, because everything we're talking about in terms of the ease of application is really going to come down to how the submittal requirements are framed and what materials we give folks. We're really hoping to make it as simple as possible, have checklists, both for people to submit and also for us to review, and definitely trying to tier it as much as possible so that the sort of most basic landscape plan that's required for like a single family house should be super simple, as much as possible. How exactly that's going to shake out is still to be determined. But level one, some of the considerations we're trying to bring in is, many months ago when we were originally talking about this, Tony was bringing up the issue or the request that the submittal requirements could be framed as much as possible in an educational way for single family homeowners. So how do we use these submittal requirements to guide people towards paying attention to the things that we want them to notice in their landscape without adding an extra burden in terms of really specific planning? That's going to take a little bit of creativity to figure out how to actually achieve that. And so I made some bullet points of the sort of things that we would ideally like homeowners to be aware of, without necessarily being super specific about, sort of how do they report to us about those things. So awareness of existing drainages. It would be really nice if folks understood how water moves through their land. If they have a drainage on their land, they should probably know about that. They should probably know, where the high points on their land are generally, and, generally where water is flowing, the directionality. We still haven't quite figured out the drainage requirements because we have to work with the county engineer and also trying to dovetail it a little bit with the update to the floodplain ordinance that's going to be happening. But one thing that's likely going to happen is there are going to be some changes to, asking people to infiltrate water on their own properties from any water that's created by the roof or by any new impermeable surface. And so if that's the case, we want people to be able to understand in a basic way how to do that properly without causing problems. Want to know where the inlet of their basin is and, make sure that the outlet is pointed towards the natural drainage or the street. Make sure they're designing those properly. So those are some things to keep in mind. At the same time, we don't need people to be calculating exactly how much water is, coming off of here and how making them do a lot of really complicated calculations. So those are just considerations. How exactly we're going to accomplish that is, work for the next step here. And then I think with tier number 2, anything that requires a site plan, actually requiring, a more serious drainage plan, which is going to be required anyway, and probably an irrigation system diagram and a couple additional things. But if folks have suggestions about aspects of this that should be tiered, what are things that specifically should not be required of sort of individual single home builders, I'm curious to hear that.
So I have a logistical concern, and maybe, I'm sure others have thought of this too, but if you buy, let's say that you buy a new home that a builder just finished, and in general, the builders don't landscape. So you buy the home, it's not landscape. You get the builder has the CO and you move in. And it generally works out well because the homeowner landscapes it the way they want it landscaped. The builder doesn't want to put the money in it. They don't want to landscape it the way the builder wants to do it anyway. They want to wash their hands of it, basically. So how does that work with there's the timing issue here, right? I mean, you get the CO, then you do the landscaping, basically. I guess you could require a big deposit, big enough so that it gets people's attention and they finish it within a set amount of time. I don't know how else it would be done, though.
Bryce, you want to speak a little bit to your experience in the city?
So no, I mean, exactly what you said. It's happened several times and people have talked about that, saying, I sell this off and it's not landscaped. State basically, the state passed a law, you're not allowed to hold up SABO for landscaping specifically. So, I mean, anything that we could sort of try to tie it to, it's already done.
And was that the issue with those folks down in Back Creek by Sherry Griffith, where there was all that flooding, all the basins weren't, I think.
All the basins weren't built in time. Basically, they built in phases. That one.
Everything had been done for a while, and the flooding happened.
Oh, in
I
the
think
Label
in
Court.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah, like is this? I think
There was a
that's maybe
swale that was
a
above
symptom.
those 2 houses that flooded. That was not.
Yeah, and I don't think it
was
was ever.
It was
They didn't
not
keep up with
exactly.
scooping it out.
Yeah.
So
So that was more of an. Sorry.
maybe a symptom of the process we're talking about.
Could be. That's more engineering, and since they're phasing the development there, and they built everything sort of in chunks, this chunk was supposed to be protecting this chunk, but they hadn't built it yet. So that's sort of what happened there. They just didn't go in and do everything horizontally all at once,
Gotcha.
and so they had to go back once 2 people's houses flooded.
Well, didn't
Sorry.
the code change though, that it won't allow people to put their personal drainage on their property? It has to be done through subdivision. That happened recently, right?
So I think so, but we were talking, I mean, that's something that floodplain ordinance is trying to figure out how
They
to.
can't have personal flood drainages on their property. They have to be specific to the whole subdivision, because that's what happened in Moyne Court. Everybody had their own basin, and even the area that I live in the city, we have concrete drainage that goes through our property. And a neighbor next door to me asked me if she could fill it in. I said, well, you can't, but you're gonna flood out everybody upstream. They don't, they just didn't realize. that.
Right.
And I think that was what's happening there. They didn't build it exactly the way they were supposed to. They got COs before they got the drainage in. So now that doesn't happen. I think there was something passed recently that requires them that nothing, you can't get a CO until it's completely done. That's based on.
I guess I'm confused. You can't get a CO now until
You have to have your drainage.
the drainage. Okay,
Yeah.
so separating it out.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Anyway, I think something like $1,000 landscape deposit that gets refunded when it's done would be enough to get somebody's attention, or something along those lines. And if it was refunded to the homeowner rather than the builder, because the builder's not going to hold title once the thing is sold, right? The builder can add it to his price, but then the owner's got some incentive to get it done because they get a chunk of cash when they're finished.
That thought is sort of tickling something in my brain. I remember that coming up, especially with Lions back in the city. And there was something that prohibited them from doing this, and I don't know if it was state level. I don't know if it was litigation. I need to look at it.
I think it's reasonable to expect it would be done after CO. I didn't realize there's a state law saying that.
That's new.
But then, so then the issue is incentive.
Did you just mention that there's work being done on a flood ordinance or?
The floodplain ordinance needs to be updated so that it matches more concretely, which gets us essentially more leverage for when these huge flood events happen. We can say how much we've done to help comply with that level of what flood insurers really demand for personal houses. So by updating that ordinance and then starting to push out outreach and enforcement on it, that can help everybody's flood insurance rates significantly.
So
and
looking
qualify as what we need.
looking here at level 1 where it says awareness of existing drainages on land, yada yada yada, is that something maybe to point back towards
Yes,
the floodplain? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
that might be our mechanism for it anyways. I don't have to put it all in here, even though the benefit would be the same.
So I was, oh, sorry.
Well, I'm just saying, a lot of times, all of the different agencies come together and do all these things. A lot of the stuff that they're writing in here will be reviewed by everybody who needs to review it. So it's not just specific to.
So I was confused on this whole submittal thing. You're trying to do two different types of permitting.
Yeah, two different levels of plan. So what we're trying to do is so this ordinance is going to apply to all new construction, but we
Right.
don't want to make small homeowners who are just, building a single family home or something have to send in the same level and detail of plans as a larger developer. So we're trying to figure out how to, what are the basic things that we do need to require from small homeowners, and how do we make those as simple as possible to fulfill?
My one comment is I think irrigation systems need to be on single family homes. I continually talk to the water guys at Grand County and the city, and the state constantly is like hounding them to for proper irrigation, which they can't do, and we should probably just start to do that. I think for any kind of building. But that would be my one comment on that. And I think we just gotta throw out the gray water mandate.
Well, the gray water mandate just needs to be somewhere else. It just can't be with the turf.
It can't be in the landscaping.
It can't be with the turf section. Because gray water can't be used for turf.
No, we had this whole thing where
Okay.
any new housing,
Uh-huh.
it's just gotta be gray water ready.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I don't see any of that in there.
That was in this ordinance earlier. And I think Elisa suggested taking it out because my understanding was that it doesn't belong in the landscape code. It's a building code thing. As much as I thought that was a great thing.
Yeah. Would it be to pull that lever?
It would be nice to look into just,
Yeah.
what would be possible to make that happen. Cause just stubbing out for it, could
Yeah.
requiring people to stub out would just create so many more opportunities in the future.
Well, Royal Crossing was required to step out or opt out very specifically. But they also ran into lot size problems.
Right.
Their lots were too small to facilitate. So there's a few things that need to be taken into consideration before that's adopted all the way.
Yeah. I just noticed that was missing on that.
Yeah,
But
that did come out.
I really think that irrigation systems should be on any kind of.
Yeah, so I guess I would love to talk to you a little bit more about that, Erin, just in terms of sort of what we should be asking about the irrigation system and what needs to be reported in the plan.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk more about that outside.
Sure.
Any further comments on the submittal? We're not giving you much right now, I know. So that'll be the next thing. And so the last thing I wanted to discuss was timeline for this. So this is a big question for us. We don't currently have a planning director. So things are all a little bit busy and complicated right now, and we've been discussing whether it's even appropriate to move forward with passing an ordinance while we don't have a planning director. So my timeline with the county ends on August 14th, so that's pretty soon. I'd love to get this to a handoff place before I leave.
Did you apply?
What was that?
Did you apply for executive director? Come on, Katie.
Not disclosing anything. Yeah, so I mean, there's more work to be done. Obviously, there's a lot of some conversations that the county commission suggested we have, more conversations with contractors, conversation with the health department about gray water. So those all need to happen, and will take some time. And I'll try to do some of those before the end of my term. But yeah, we were just curious what you all thought about what timeline you'd like to see for this and what we should plan on.
I think it's funny. I talk to people all the time. I know 4 people. I'm like, they're wanting to get rid of their grass, and I'm like, oh, just wait. Like, don't do it right now. Like, I'm like, you got like $15,000 in grass you can get back. And so I do see, like, but I don't, like, okay, I know 4 people that want that. So, I'm saying, like, I do see, right, exactly. I'm like, man, I know people are kind of waiting. Like, I've told them to wait for this. So. Yeah.
So how long do folks think it's going to take to have a new planning director?
I was in meetings last week with the team. Kind of what Quinn said, and I don't know, was hopefully, some offers would go out within a couple weeks. Those are offers. Much, right?
So then they've got
Exactly.
9 months to
Yeah.
2 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, I think you have a valid point. There's a point. You've done a ton of work, and you have the feedback, and you have the feedback from these commissions. You should move along.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same mind. I am assuming that the land use code updates are going forward still.
They are. It's on Thursday.
I don't know why this would kind of continue forward. We do have a team in place.
You're pretty close here.
I mean, I don't really see this causing too much of a public outcry. I mean, a lot of it's not really going to be applicable to folks. I mean, I'd be really interested what builders and contractors have to say, because maybe there's something glaring that we're overlooking that, could drastically increase the cost. I mean, that's kind of the only lingering type of issue that I'm seeing that would, I think, go against some of our other priorities of,
Steve,
housing for folks. I'm not really seeing anything there. I guess just real quick, the last thought I have is if we are trying to, if we hustle up on this, summer is kind of the time where a lot of people are gone and away. Is that something, just kind of thinking what else is, coming up on the calendar? Because if this ruffles feathers and people feel like, oh, well, this is the time of year when we're, a lot of folks are gone or, doing trips, whatever. Moab City's got their property tax issue that's going to come up. Like, how much do we want to try to keep things cool? It's probably not helpful and just causes more.
Bill, Steve, you brought up the same thing that Winfield and Walker brought up about construction contractors, but to the point that I was making about who really does the landscaping, why do they even care? If it's residential development and it's a single lot, and we could move this to a homeowner requirement, why would the contractor even care?
I'm not sure it's that they would care. It's just they may have insight onto how that could increase costs in some way. And maybe that doesn't affect our single family homeowners who are coming here and have plenty, many of them, are doing well enough that whatever that cost is may not really impact them. But, then that whole missing middle and other types of development, how does that impact?
But what effect do these have on commercial properties?
Well, it's the submittal mechanism is the main thing.
Say that again.
The submittal mechanism. So since we have it sort of tied to building permit or site plan at this point, that is a contractor or an engineer or an
Right.
architect, an applicant that's basically getting ready to develop the property. And if our submittal requirement goes with ownership, that changes that input.
Yeah.
So
See, I
since
think that's the key is we got to switch the requirement to the homeowner rather than the person pulling the permit. And then that issue goes away. I guess there'll be some impact there. If we require the person applying for the permit to do $1,000 or $2,000 landscaping deposit, then they'd have to pass that cost on to the owner when they sell that, and the owner gets a refund. That's kind of the way I would see that work. But I think really what we should do here is minimize the impact, at least for single family residents, on the contractor and push it on the landowner, because that's who's doing it today anyways. It makes it consistent with existing practice. When we get into a bigger development like you did you have to do a landscaping plan anyway?
I think that's all part of the site plan, if not landscaping specifically.
A multifamily and commercial all have to have site plans, and that includes drainages and
It's drainage.
So that's no change from existing practice either.
Well, these requirements are stricter.
A little
Yeah.
strict,
And the disturbed areas, it's trying to get you to think a little bit harder about what's going on there.
yeah. It has to be stricter because the requirements today are almost nothing.
Well, and contractors don't necessarily disturb all the land
Yeah,
either. Generally, they only go like 5 or 6 feet out from the foundation line.
you want. them to
Depends on
build
your.
it.
Depends on your
That's true.
There's varying areas of.
But you do want to minimize disturbance, and these have good incentives to minimize disturbance. I don't know.
I would throw it out there, like how I see like Arroyo and the more affordable housing projects too. Like a lot, like I try to help people out with their landscaping, and they just are like, yeah, I got no money. But some people, they have like a little stash of gold at the end. They're like have to, and I'm like, I almost see what Jerry says is like, hey, you could get like this $5,000 back. That's how those guys are doing it. They're doing it like $3,000 at a time. So it's like,
Yeah, that's a dilemma.
you can
that-
do a lot if you do your own landscape. $3,000 gets
Go
an
a long
Arroyo
way
Crossing
with that.
yard done.
And I liked your idea about stubbing out with a vacuum breaker too. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, make that a part of if landscaping's required and if there's going to be irrigation in the plan, then you require that to get CO. That'd be easy to do.
yeah. And I see if the builder has, okay, you buy that property with that all in the loan, if you get a loan, that it's easier to pay 30 years on $3,000 than it is to like go get a credit card and blow the money in the hardware store. I don't know. That's a couple of things. I just see how people are doing that.
But there's a cadence to building, and the
Right.
landscaping definitely comes after
Last.
the buyer
Right.
purchases it from the builder for a
Right.
single family.
And it's just interesting that this is the hang up with the city, and this is our main sticking point with this kind of, I mean, not main, but like one of the big ones, right? So we don't really know about laws, about what we can force people to do, what we can't. That seems to be like needing clarification. Okay.
Well, I guess what we can do is put what we want together and then run it by the attorney. Right? Isn't that the usual mechanism?
does seem like we're very close.
Yeah.
Katie, nice work in bringing it here.
Yeah. I
Both
think we should
commissions just
try
get
to
to
wrap
attack
it.
it.
Hearings haven't started yet.
I've learned a lot through that process.
Yeah.
It's been, the feedback has been the best part of it.
And
I don't know what is.
With the timeline then on
Yeah,
this?
I mean, is that more of a response for the county commission? I don't feel like I've really ever had that kind of posed to us before. Usually we're taking the directive.
I
from
want it
them.
on my
What
desk
is
by
the-
next week.
Katie, what
Yeah.
would make, sense, Katie, is you've done so much work on this. If you could get something ready to go before you leave, I think that would be an ideal target.
And I'm absolutely willing to do that and would be very happy to have something ready to go as a handoff when I leave. I certainly have time and it's a priority for me. I just, I wouldn't want this to get in the way of other things that are priorities for our office, like the land use code updates, or to, a requirement to push this forward to get in the way of sufficient public outreach or anything like that.
Okay, we will move on. I'm guessing there's no citizens to be heard. Any future considerations?
I can tell you what we have coming in the next meeting. We have 2 rezones that will be up for your consideration. One on River Sands Road and Moab Heat and Cool. Rezone application.
They're the ones adjacent to Rocky Road.
Yes,
Already been told no.
they would like to apply for neighborhood commercial instead of general business.
One comment, like, I wasn't able to find like these notes and agenda in the civic portal.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna get better on it.
No, like, I had for some reason like the thing, and it was like none of this was on. I was like, oh, like I'm like was reading it just now, like, oh, I gotta get like, yeah. Was that? Did you guys like? Was that in the email, or was it just me not figuring it out?
So I sent out the agenda, the minutes, and the interview questions.
Okay, yeah,
as
I
the
got
email.
those.
Yeah, so and then I
Okay.
noticed with just the rezone, because it was the only piece of material I had that was
Yeah.
ready.
Oh, I'm not being tricked.
Yeah.
I was just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
I was
will-
wondering if it was me. Or,
I will have a better process in 2 weeks, I promise.
Okay. yeah,
I know
because it
it's
kind
like
of got
going
brought.
together to pack an agenda and it's heinous.
Well, especially when it's like, oh, I have to do it now because we're off for the next 4 days.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, I just feel like I didn't.
Because
I
you're
didn't
off.
see that upzone in Thompson and all that, and I'm like, oh, I hope I'm making the right decision.
And Bryce, did you see that your email didn't get to Mary?
I did.
I did, and I forwarded.
Yeah.
I left out a Y on county.
Thank you. Yeah, and then when I
Yeah.
retyped it, I left out, and then I retyped it again with the Y, and it still bounced. And I was like, I don't even know what I did wrong with that one. So-
Ruby, I did have one more question on future considerations. That is, so with Elisa gone, we have our consultants working on future land use planning. Are you able to manage the relationship with them?
We're working on it. We have a meeting with them for Friday to get together and sort of look at what they have done so far and some more materials.
When would you expect the next checkpoint with the planning commission?
I know the end of their contract with final deliverables would be October. And I know they said they wanted to have at least one more check-in before that with you guys. So let me
If you-
double check we have the timeline on that.
If you could in the next meeting, would you mind? I just want to make sure that in the busy summer session, that's a meeting I don't miss.
For sure.
Say again. Yeah, a number of us did.
Out of town for those exact dates.
Yeah. We actually had a good discussion about it after in the last meeting too. Discussion about, the conversations we had. Yeah, it might be worthwhile just tuning in and listening to that portion of the meeting anyway.
So just because on the tying up some things, there's in that resume or the application. What did you want us to do with that?
So I don't think we have to do anything with it except read the application. And then when she comes in, she's supposed to answer 3 of the questions verbally. I'll probably
Is it-
read out the question to her, and then she'll probably, tell us what she wrote, tell us further details. And then I think we can ask questions of her then at the end of that. And then we'll make some recommendation to the county commission, who will certainly follow our advice.
That's right.
Oh,
Wow.
I didn't know that.
And then how many were there?
4.
Wow.
And how long is that term for? Is there-
Have we, for some reason, I think I've only seen one of the applications. Is that right? But we'll get the others.
Yeah.
Before. Good.
And then the other letter that was given to us was the one that you responded to, an email from the Alicia Oliver. And that seemed to be, I was like confused. It seemed internal, right?
It might have
Like,
been. I might have attached the wrong file
Yeah, I
by
don't know.
accident.
it was somebody saying, shouldn't the planning commission have people from outside of,
Oh, that was the asking a question.
okay, to Alicia. Oh, I thought she was asking.
Oh, and it's to any, I mean, it was just a question I was asking.
Okay.
So just to set, regarding that subject, to set the record straight, I do live in the county, not the
Yeah.
city.
Did you may want to, I mean, I thought maybe that was brought up because that was like future consideration or what.
Yeah, I guess most do live in the city, which is kind of, well, I guess that's where most of the population is too. So maybe it makes sense.
Certainly the county commissioners get elected from everywhere.
They're pretty diverse right here in the county seat, right? So this is
I'm in the town.
right.
Yeah, it's a pretty good mix.
No more future considerations. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So
All in favor?